For 10 years, Amina walked the same path every afternoon, carrying a steaming plate of food wrapped in cloth, her steps steady, her heart full. She never missed a day, not in storms, not through sickness, not even when she had barely enough for herself. At the corner of an old alleyway, hunched in silence, sat Yusuf, a crippled beggar with tired eyes and limbs that refused to move. He never begged, he never spoke, and he never once thanked her. But Amina kept coming. Not for praise, not for recognition, just for the sake of Allah. To the world, it was a small act. To Yusuf, it would become the light that pulled him back from the edge of despair. What Amina didn't know was that the man she fed in silence was no ordinary beggar, and when he finally knocked on her door, the truth he carried would leave her breathless. Amina had always believed that the true value of a deed wasn't in how loud it was, but in how quietly it reached the heavens. She lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, working part-time as a seamstress to support herself and her teenage daughter, Layla. Life wasn't easy, and some months she barely made enough to cover their rent and food. But no matter how tight things got, there was always one meal she never failed to prepare, the one for the man at the corner. His name, she later learned, was Yusuf. But for years, he was simply the man who sat on the cracked stone by the alley near the old mosque, legs twisted from an unknown affliction, eyes fixed on the ground, back hunched as if carrying a burden heavier than just poverty. Amina never knew his story, and he never offered it. But each afternoon, after making lunch for Layla and herself, she would prepare a third plate, wrap it in a clean cloth, and walk the 15 minutes to where he sat. She would place the food gently beside him, smile even if he didn't look up, and walk away without a word. She never lingered, never asked if he liked it, never waited for gratitude. She wasn't feeding a man, she was feeding her faith. Neighbors had questioned her, some mocked her, whispering that the man might be insane, dangerous, or even just pretending to be crippled. But Amina didn't entertain doubt. Her heart told her that sincerity wasn't measured by what others saw, it was measured by what Allah knew. Over time, the small ritual became a part of her life, as natural as breathing. The walk, the food, the quiet act, it was her daily prayer without words. Layla often watched her mother with curiosity. She didn't understand it fully, but she sensed there was something sacred in her mother's routine, something deep and unspoken. And though Amina never expected anything in return, what she couldn't see, what she would never have guessed, was that each meal, each silent visit, was reshaping the soul of the man on the stone. Yusuf may have looked like a broken man, but inside him, something long dead had begun to stir. Yusuf had been sitting at that same corner for nearly a decade, yet no one really saw him. People passed by, tossing glances that flickered with discomfort, sometimes with pity, often with indifference. His limbs, deformed by an accident he never spoke of, made movement nearly impossible. But it wasn't just his body that had collapsed, it was his spirit. Once a man of stature and presence, his silence now stretched further than words ever could, wrapping around him like armor. He didn't beg, he didn't explain, and he certainly didn't complain. He simply existed, day after day, rain or shine, barely reacting to the world around him, until Amina came. At first, he assumed she would stop like the others had, once or twice out of sympathy, maybe curiosity, then forget him when life got busy. But she didn't. Day after day, she brought him food. Not leftovers tossed in a plastic bag, but proper meals, carefully prepared, still warm, with soft bread, lentils, rice, or stew. Occasionally a date or a slice of fruit was tucked in. And always, the cloth was folded with care. She never asked for his name, never sat down, never pressured him to talk. She simply gave and walked away. It disarmed him. No one had treated him like a person in so long. At first, he was suspicious. People didn't just give without wanting something, but her consistency wore down his defenses. He began to wait for her, not out of hunger, but because her presence chipped away at the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. Her silence spoke louder than any sermon. In her kindness, Yusuf found dignity again. He still didn't speak, he couldn't. His voice felt trapped beneath years of regret and loss, but he noticed everything. The way she smiled, despite the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled some days from overwork, the way she brought extra on Fridays. Though he never showed it, every act pierced through the fog of his despair. And while the world still passed him by, unaware that the crippled beggar was beginning to feel human again, Amina's quiet routine was planting something in him that had long been buried: hope. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when Layla finally asked the question that had been lingering on her mind for years. She stood by the kitchen counter, watching her mother pack the day's meal into a reusable container, tucking in 2 spoons and a folded napkin like she always did. "Mama," she said gently, "why do you keep feeding that man? He doesn't even thank you. He just sits there like you don't exist." Amina paused, tying the cloth tighter around the container. Her hands stilled, and her eyes lifted, not in frustration, but in reflection. She smiled faintly and walked toward the window where the afternoon sun spilled in. "I don't feed him because he thanks me, Layla," she said softly. "I feed him because Allah sees me." Layla's brow furrowed. "But doesn't it bother you that he never even says a word? What if he's not even grateful?" Amina turned to her daughter and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "If I only did good to those who returned it, then my kindness would depend on people, not on God. And that's not how I was raised. We give, not because others deserve it, but because it purifies our own hearts." Layla looked down, unsure how to respond. She loved her mother, admired her strength and calm, but she couldn't understand how anyone could keep giving so quietly, so selflessly, without expecting even a smile. Most people would have stopped after a week, but Amina had kept going for years. "He's someone's son, Layla," she added, her voice lower now. "Someone's brother, someone's pain. I may never know his story, but Allah knows mine, and that's enough for me." In that moment, something shifted in Layla. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she saw a different kind of strength in her mother, one that didn't need applause, one rooted in something higher than recognition. As Amina stepped out with the meal in hand, her long dress brushing the tiled floor, Layla watched her go. And this time, instead of seeing a woman doing something strange, she saw a woman doing something beautiful and deeply, deeply sincere. Winter came late that year, but when it arrived, it came with sharp winds and cold rain that turned the streets into rivers. Most people stayed indoors, canceling errands and skipping outings, waiting for clearer skies, but not Amina. That morning, her joints ached from the fever she had tried to ignore for 2 days. Her throat was raw and her voice barely above a whisper. Layla pleaded with her to rest, to skip just 1 day, promising she would bring the man something herself. But Amina shook her head. "He knows me," she whispered, coughing lightly. "If he sees you, he might think I've forgotten him." Bundled in a long coat and thick scarf, she stepped out into the downpour, shielding the wrapped container under her shawl. Her shoes soaked through quickly, but she walked with the same determined pace, each step slower than the last, but unwavering. The city looked different in the rain, quieter, lonelier. When she reached the alley, Yusuf was there, hunched more tightly than usual, his body trembling slightly. Water pooled around him, his coat soaked, but he didn't move. When she approached, he looked up just for a second, and their eyes met. It was the first time in all those years that he had acknowledged her presence directly. His eyes, dark and heavy with sorrow, widened slightly, not in surprise, but in disbelief. She placed the meal beside him like always, but this time her hands trembled not from nerves, but from fever. She gave him the softest nod, turned around, and walked back into the storm, coughing as she went. Yusuf stared after her for a long time, the food untouched beside him. He had seen many things in his life: wealth, betrayal, pride, and ruin. But nothing had prepared him for a woman who showed up in the freezing rain, burning with illness, just to feed a man who never said a word to her. That day, he didn't cry, he didn't speak. But something deep within him cracked open, just enough for a sliver of light to get in. Days passed, and subtle changes began to show in the man. His hands, once grime-covered and trembling, were now cleaner. His eyes no longer darted in fear or shame. Though his coat was still tattered, he sat taller, more aware. Amina noticed the difference, but never questioned it. She continued to deliver food each morning without fail, her presence constant and unassuming. What she didn't see was how her kindness had become his anchor. That warm meal, placed gently beside him with no judgment, was more than food, it was dignity. Slowly, he began to greet her. First with a nod, then a quiet, "Thank you." It was all he could manage, but Amina always smiled in return. Layla, watching from a distance, was moved by how deeply her mother's care impacted him. No sermons, no grand gestures, just consistency. In a world that rushed past the broken, Amina paused, and in that pause, she allowed someone who had lost everything to feel human again. The man hadn't changed overnight, but something had awakened in him. She had fed not just his stomach, but his hope. One quiet meal at a time, she helped him begin to believe he still mattered. A few weeks later, on a quiet Thursday morning, Amina found a small envelope tucked beneath the cloth of the container she had brought back from the alley. Confused, she looked around, but Yusuf was nowhere to be seen. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges but written in careful, deliberate handwriting. It read, "Dear Amina, for years, I said nothing. I was too broken to speak, too ashamed to meet your eyes. But you came anyway. You fed me with more than food, you fed me with dignity. I wasn't always like this. I was once a businessman, wealthy, respected. I lost everything through a betrayal I never saw coming, and the fall shattered me, body and soul. I lost my legs, I lost my will. But you kept me alive long enough to remember who I was." Amina's hands trembled as she read on. "I've been healing quietly, and now, something else you never expected is about to happen. I didn't want to leave without saying this. You showed me mercy when I showed nothing. You gave when I had nothing. May Allah reward you in ways this world never could." It was unsigned, but the envelope carried no doubt. It was from Yusuf. That afternoon, when Amina returned to the alley, he was gone. The stone was empty for the first time in a decade. She stood there, unsure of what to feel. Relief, worry, hope. The silence was heavy, but not sad. It felt like the closing of a chapter, one that had been written not with words, but with patience, rain, warm meals, and quiet prayers. She walked back home with the letter pressed to her chest, eyes stinging, not from sadness, but from something deeper, peace. She didn't know where he had gone, but she knew something had changed. Her years of unseen giving had reached a heart long buried, and now she understood. Allah had always seen. It was a cold, overcast afternoon when the truth finally unfolded. Amina had brought the usual meal to the man she'd served for months, but something felt different. He was standing this time, dressed in clean clothes, still simple, but noticeably better than before. He smiled warmly and asked if he could speak with her. With gentle hesitation, she nodded. "I'm not who you think I am," he said quietly. "I was never truly poor. I came here to find something I had lost." Amina listened without a word, her hazel eyes steady and kind. He explained that he was once a billionaire businessman who had lost his way, disillusioned by greed and hollow praise. He had walked away from it all, choosing to live anonymously among those who had nothing, to learn what truly mattered. "And every day," he continued, "you reminded me of what I was searching for, humanity." Amina's expression didn't change. She simply said, "Hungry is hungry. That's all I saw." The man's eyes welled with tears. Her compassion hadn't come from what he was, but who he was, someone in need. And that truth struck him harder than any fortune he had ever earned. After the revelation, Yusuf, the man once thought to be a beggar, disappeared for a few days. When he returned, he came not with rags, but with a vision. He approached Amina and Layla with a proposal to fund a foundation in Amina's name that would serve meals to the poor with dignity and warmth, just as she had done for him. At first, Amina hesitated. She never gave to be noticed, and the thought of her name on a plaque felt unnecessary. But when Yusuf explained that this was not about recognition, but about replicating her kindness on a larger scale, she agreed. The shelter opened quietly, but began serving dozens, then hundreds. Each meal was hand-wrapped with care, just like hers. Layla oversaw daily operations, while Amina continued to cook in the early mornings. Yusuf funded everything but refused to take credit. "She gave me more than food," he told the press when the story spread. She gave me back my soul. The community watched in awe as a single act of mercy rippled into something transformative. Amina never changed. She still walked the same quiet path home each day, basket in hand, heart full and moved by the world's praise, only by its pain. As the foundation grew, Amina stayed the same humble, unseen, devoted. She cooked each morning as always, wrapping an extra portion to deliver quietly to the shelter. Her daughter noticed how unchanged her mother remained despite the praise. When asked how she could give so selflessly, Amina would simply say, "When you serve someone, you see yourself in them." She turned away interviews, believing real charity didn't need applause. People didn't change because of her words, they changed by watching her. Even volunteers began to slow down and offer not just food, but attention, care, and dignity. Amina had become more than a giver. She was a living reminder of silent mercy. Her kindness was not in grand gestures, but in how she made the invisible feel seen. Without ever preaching, she taught a city how to remember the forgotten and to treat every soul as though it mattered deeply. Years later, when Amina passed away peacefully, the city mourned not just a woman, but a light. At her vigil, hundreds came to honor her legacy, including the once forgotten man whose life she changed. He stood quietly, eyes filled with tears, whispering, "She saved me with a meal." The foundation continued, stronger than ever, now led by her daughter who kept her mother's humble ways alive. On the wall outside the center, a plaque read, "You were never invisible, just waiting to be remembered." Amina didn't leave behind riches, but a legacy of kindness that spread further than any donation. People gave more generously, listened more carefully, and looked more closely at those society ignored. Her life proved that one quiet act of compassion could echo for generations. She didn't seek recognition, but the world remembered her, not because she asked them to, but because she reminded them of what humanity should be.